boxers on, Mick. We don't want to see you in your boxers. I thought it was very important for you all to see that I have big D energy. For years I've been telling you I have big D energy and that the ladies love me for it, but you didn't believe me. So I think you had to see it for yourselves. And it's very important for me, for the ladies to understand if they're in need of vitamin D, I'm the man to resuscitate them with it. With that said, let's talk DC. Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most to start your girlfriends, wives, and especially your boyfriends and your husbands who are not up to the task of fulfilling the business of satisfying you. A very warm welcome to Tuesday's edition of the DCU Daily. You can follow me on X Twitter at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X, on TikTok Mad Mickey's World, and on Snapchat BMouth60. So welcome, 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 welcome. So it has been revealed from James Wan, the director of one of the most successful comic book movies of all time and a personal favourite of mine, Aquaman. So he has confirmed that he has started initial talks with co-CEO of DC Studios, Peter Safran, to return to DC. What they're cooking up, I don't know. Now, James Wan said this, that his preference right now is to direct horror. He hasn't directed a movie for a while, and so it's very, very interesting. But it does look like that Peter Safran and James Wan are in talks. I have a lot of time for James Wan. His Aquaman movie was a great achievement. I don't know a director, maybe Snyder, who could have achieved in shooting such a beautiful movie, mostly set with computer-generated images. The underwater sequences were beautiful. Atlantis was beautiful. The performances were beautiful. The music was beautiful. That film came at a vital time for DC. It was after Justice League. For James Wan to make a movie that brought in over $1 billion, something a Superman movie hasn't been able to do recently, the Batman hasn't been able to do recently, the final kind of layers of the DCEU wasn't able to do. And as I say, Superman got nowhere near that, did it? So, James Wan is class, and nothing makes me more happier to hear that he's in talks with co-CEO of DC Studios, James Wan. Now, here's how the relationship works between James Wan and Peter Safran. Now, Peter Safran's the Safran Group, and James Wan worked very, very closely together for many, many years at New Line Cinema. That's where they both originate from. So the problem isn't with Peter Safran and James Wan. They get on fine. That's why they're having talks for James to return to DC, and it's not James Gunn. Because James Gunn, as I've catalogued many times, and James Wan fell out over Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Ultimately, as I've said many times as well, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was going to be this epic Wrath of Khan movie, but it ended up being more James Gunn's movie than James Wan's. The way the movie looked was beautiful, but the movie was shortened down. The movie wasn't what Jason Momoa and James Wan intended. And that's very, very sad, because James Wan is a visual genius. What he did with the Aquaman movie was sensational. So nothing would make me more happier than for James Wan to return. So they're in early talks, and it's very, very interesting. What are they in early talks for him to do? Would it be, now let's think about this. James has got a history of horror. Well, could it be, with losing James Mangold as the director, the writer-director of Swamp Thing, that they're looking to bring James Wan in to direct a Swamp Thing movie for the DCU, or maybe even for DC Elseworlds. So this is very, very interesting. Now, we've been here before with superstar directors. They've spoken to Darren Aronofsky, who apparently quoted in loving James Gunn's Superman. It sounds to me Because I don't believe you, Darren. Darren, you're a critically acclaimed director. There's no way you think that James Gunn did a good job. So why would Darren Aronofsky be complimenting James Gunn? Well, we've already heard rumours that he's the one who's going to maybe be directing, is it the Teen Titans movie or whatever else he's doing? I'm not sure. He's been rumoured to be directing a DCU movie. Gunn, to his credit, you can criticise Gunn for a lot of things, but has gone for the best directors. Ben Affleck, Darren Aronofsky, the guy who was going to do Sergeant Rock, I can't pronounce his name, right? He's been ambitious, but every time he's gone for a superstar director, they've said no. Because no talented director or writer-director wants to be directed by James Gunn and Peter Safran, and even worse, David Zaslav, a guy who knows nothing about scripted entertainment. So we've got to be very, very tentative about this, but this is a great move, because driving James Wan out of DC is one of the worst decisions, one of the worst things that they've ever done. Now, I don't think it was Gunn's intention to drive the guy out, but you pushed the guy too far. You know, you can only push good people so far, and that's what you did. James Wan must return to DC. James Wan is a businessman as well as a great director. And I said many, many moons ago, and I keep on saying this, James Wan should be the co-CEO of DC Studios. But, is that what's going on here? Could James Wan replace James Gunn as the co-CEO of DC Studios? I tell you what, if my geek boner, and I'd have to wear trousers so no one can see it, my geek boner would be so up there if that happened. Has James Gunn decided to step aside? Because Verbal Riot, someone called Verbal Riot, I think that's what he calls himself on Twitter, made a very good point. That James Gunn, when talking on the podcast, the weekly podcast for Peacemaker 2, seems more passionate about Peacemaker than he did for Superman. That is a factual statement, Verbal Riot. But here's the thing. I hold no ill will towards James Gunn for being more passionate about things he likes over things he doesn't really like. We know he doesn't really like, has no interest in A-grade comic book characters. He should never have been let loose on Superman. I beg Zaslav and Safran not to allow him to be let loose on Batman either. Could these negotiations with James Wan be because Gunn is stepping aside? Because I believe in a certain corner of DC, Peacemaker, Suicide Squad 2, something like that, right? James would be brilliant. He's good at doing that thing. But we can see that Superman wasn't right for him. It's not in his roadhouse. It didn't work. Because when you're making a Superman film, you've got to love and understand Superman. You know, Darren Aronofsky said, well, Superman's a tough character to do. No, he's not. If you love Superman and you know him like I do, that's why I was able to write, you know, such a huge script for Superman. And I've spoken about that before. I know him and I love him. So I challenged him emotionally. He's walking around with his Action Comics #1 costume for the entire movie, for my entire script. Because that's one thing I love many, many pieces of Superman live action media. But one thing that's kind of confused me through the years, why they've never used full time. I know in Superman and Lois, in the pilot episode, very quickly, he wears one of those original logo costumes, but he doesn't wear it for long, does he now? So, that's one thing I'd like to correct. Having Superman in the Action Comics #1 costume. But to make a great Superman movie, you've got to know and love Superman. Dick Donner knew and loved Superman. I think to a point, Zack Snyder knew and loved Superman. I'm not sure if David S. Goyer loves Superman, but he wanted to give him a modern day grounded slant. But I still don't think that having Superman break somebody's neck is a great thing to have done. It didn't bother me. I found it very compelling at the time, but I don't think it's probably the right thing to do. People will say about Superman 2 and the 3 villains from Krypton apparently being killed by Superman. But as I said in a few videos ago, having 3 villains sliding down an ice slide is different than someone on screen while children are watching breaking a villain's neck. Do you get me? There's no debate there. And killing off Zod was a mistake because he would have great potential in A Man of Steel 2 and creating and continuing David S. Goyer's story. So, if you know and love Superman, you can make a great Superman movie. Alfred Gough and Miles Miller clearly understood and loved Superman to do Smallville, because Smallville was really on the money. They either knew and loved him or they read up on him. They certainly knew the Superman comics, didn't they? Let's be clear about that. But anyway, I think that James Gunn, because James Gunn has thrived with 3 Guardians movies, Suicide Squad and the first Peacemaker. I don't know about Peacemaker 2 because I'm not allowed to watch it. I'm geo-locked, as I keep on saying. I think the best thing for DC Studios right now is to fail James Gunn upwards and give him a corner at DC Studios. And as I say, let him continue with Creature Commandos, with Peacemaker, with Suicide Squad, anything that he wants to do. Let him have his projects away from the DCU. I mean, maybe they could be part of the DCU, but he's not running DCU. I don't mind that either. But personally, I think that everyone should have their own corner. That should be the future of DC Studios. But it's not going to happen. They're obsessed with this franchise thing. They saw the MCU doing well for 3 phases, so they think they can get there. And they brought in 600 million odd, around 620, 624, 25 million when Superman is done. That's not a bad box office, but it's certainly not good enough for a Superman movie. And there's not much profit there for them. We already know that if they're telling the truth about that box office, by the way. So bringing James Wan in with Peter Safran, who have worked before at New Line Cinema, is a very, very good idea. So watch this space. This, my friends, could be what they're playing at. Rather than, bringing in James Wan to direct the movie, he could be the co-CEO with Peter Safran at DC Studios. And considering their history, it could be a great partnership. Now, let's be clear on how Snyder fans will look at this. Snyder fans will find a way to go after anyone who isn't Zack Snyder. And it is what it is. I'm not going to criticize you. I love Zack. I love his movies, right? But I don't go after people for the fuck of it. I didn't always approve of the Walter Hamada attacks. I didn't. Now, in the early days of, Ray Fisher versus Walter Hamada, I was a bit anti-Ray Fisher. But now, looking at it again, Ray was right. But, to be fair to Walter was under orders from Toby Emmerich and the rest of them. He was only doing what he was told to do. But Ray was, directly going after Walter Hamada. I still believe Walter Hamada's a good bloke. I still believe he did the best that he could for DC. It wasn't good enough, right? But he was making cheap movies. Unfortunately, apart from the first Shazam, none of them made a profit. But I don't think that Walter Hamada is a bad guy. But I can guarantee you, they will go after James Wan. They will go after anyone who isn't Snyder, right? And and they've got to do what they've got to do to get the result that they want. I get that. But I love James Wan. So if James Wan does come in as CEO of DC Studios and you go after James Wan, then I'm going to defend James Wan. And if James Wan does something shitty, of course, I will agree with you. You know me, I'm honest and direct. But yeah, I'm a big fan of James Wan. I'm a big fan of his horror movies. I think he's a genius, and I think his Aquaman movie is one of the best modern day comic book movies ever made. I see his Aquaman as the perfect storm. It looks fantastic. It's perfect to come after something like Justice League, a real fucking movie. And we can all argue, is it canon to Snyder's stuff? Not really. It is and it isn't, right? It's shot differently, and the colour palette is a lot brighter than Snyder would have shot his Aquaman movie in. But, to be fair to James Wan, he consulted heavily, day and night, with Zack Snyder, even though the rest of them were telling him not to involve Snyder. So I believe that James Wan is a good man. I believe he's leaps and bounds a better director than James Gunn will ever be. And I'm not saying that to be mean to James. James has his talents and his qualities. But he's not a CEO. That's not his quality. Running DC making big decisions about DC's future shouldn't be on James Gunn's shoulders. James Gunn should be allowed to cook in his own corner of the DC universe.